Sunday School teacher, I'm glad that you've joined us for our time of preparation and study. I'm Tim Smith with Sunday School University. Hey, before we jump into our study time, let me do this. I need to ask you for your help. If you would, please help us promote this ministry. Encourage other Sunday School teachers in your church or other Sunday School teachers that you know. Maybe share with them this ministry and how it's been helpful for you. Also, at the bottom of your outline, you'll see my email address. I'd love to hear from you about how this weekly teaching time and study time has helped you as a Sunday School teacher. So help us spread the word, and I'd love to hear from you how it's been helpful for you. Well, we're looking at the lesson for Sunday, January 23rd. The title of this lesson is Integrity Established. Now, we're beginning a study, a 6-week study in the book of Daniel. Now, there's no way in the world we're going to cover the entire book of Daniel in 6 weeks, but we've got some good lessons here for us to look at over the next several weeks. But the title of this lesson is Integrity Established. Sunday, January 23rd, we're going to be in Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 through 21. Now, in your notes, I've got your point, and that is that believers can live with integrity when tempted to compromise. Daniel wrote this book in the 6th century BC. Daniel was approximately 15 years old when King Nebuchadnezzar transported him and other captives from Judah to Babylon in 605 BC. The Babylonians attempted to remove all traces of their nationality and Daniel's nationality, as well as attempted to erase their religious background. Throughout his life, Daniel demonstrated an unwavering faith to the Lord. The account of Daniel's integrity and faithfulness to God appears against the backdrop of a dark time for God's people. Remember, they had just been defeated and exiled. The best of the best from Judah had been taken away over into Babylon. Daniel and his 3 young friends were placed in a strange pagan environment over which they had no control. Yet they were able to live with integrity when tempted to compromise. They did so because they had chosen integrity by anchoring their lives in the solid relationship with God. So let's look at these verses. Chapter 1, verses 8 through 10, and there we see a commitment expressed. Verse 8, Daniel determined that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine he drank. So he asked permission of the chief eunuch not to defile himself. God had granted Daniel kindness and compassion from the chief eunuch. Yet he said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king who assigned your food and drink. What if he sees your face looking thinner than the other young men your age? You would endanger my life with the king. So we see in these verses that in the beginning of chapter 1, that after the young men had arrived in Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar ordered for some of the Israelites' noble families, again the best of the best, to serve in his palace. If you look in verse 4, you'll see that these young men had to possess good looks, they had to demonstrate knowledge, perception, and they had to be teachable. Daniel and his friends received training in Babylon's history, their literature, and in wisdom. So that's the situation. And so in verse 8, we see Daniel and his friends, though determined not to compromise their faith, they didn't want to compromise in their Jewish dietary restrictions. Now, I've put in your notes a couple of things here. Look at that list of the challenge that they faced. Number one, Daniel and his friends could have faced a temptation to compromise. In other words, yeah, they could have done this. It could have been viewed as an insult or a direct defiance of the king and what he was asking. There was probably pressure from the non-Jewish trainees, their classmates, and that would have made the decision to stand up difficult. This statement of this request of what Daniel had, it could have jeopardized any chance that they had in advancing or promotion into the king's court. And then also this food that was brought to them, the king's food, was no doubt appealing. And then also think about this. The absence of family and friends could have encouraged compromise. I mean, there wasn't anybody there that would say, hey, if you drink this wine and eat this food, they're going to bring it up in the deacons meeting at church. There was nobody there that was going to do that. And nobody there to say, hey, your mama's going to find out about this. They didn't have that. Also, they could have been bitter toward God. God, I'm not going to follow God. Look at this. Our nation's been whooped. They've taken us off to some foreign land. They could have been mad at God and compromised, but they didn't do that. In verses 9 and 10, we see God's sovereignty as the major theme in the book of Daniel. And here the Lord demonstrated His authority over a situation in which His servants lacked control. This chief eunuch, and I would say, was this person truly a eunuch? Probably, but we don't know. The word eunuch not only talks about what happened to them, the emasculation, but also later on it became just an official title, not a description of their physical condition. So it may have been just the title that the person had. But he heard the request and said, I can't do that because it's going to get me in trouble. But Daniel expressed his commitment. Well, let's look at verses 11 through 16, and we'll see the test being passed. So verse 11. So Daniel said to the guard, whom the chief eunuch had assigned to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and that's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, their Babylonian names, please test your servant for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then examine our appearance and the appearance of the young men who are eating the king's food and deal with your servants based on what you see. He agreed with them about this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, they looked better and healthier than all the other young men whom were eating the king's food. So the guard continued to remove their food and wine, and they were able to drink and gave them vegetables. So in verses 11 and 12, we see that Daniel did not give up his request, but he presented his request to the overseer that had been assigned to them. Again, their names, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, are their Hebrew names, and these names honor God. And so that's another reason why their names were changed. Talks here in verses 11 and 12 about the vegetables that they were to eat. Basically, when you see the word vegetable, it's talking about any food that grows from seed. So that would have been fruit, that would have been grains, that would have been grain-based breads, in addition to what you and I know as vegetables. Now, I do want to say this, that there's some people that take this and say, well, this is why we need to be vegan or vegetarian and we don't need to eat meat. This passage does not condemn eating meat. The reason that Daniel didn't want to eat this meat is because it was probably pork and probably horse meat. And also, that meat had been offered as a sacrifice in a pagan temple. So it's not that he was saying, okay, it's sin for you to eat meat. No, it's sin for you to eat that type of meat that had been defiled in a pagan worship. In verse 13, we see that after 10 days, they looked better. And so he agreed. They passed in verses 14 and 15. So what was it? Was it the diet or was it their faith in God? Probably a little of both, but probably more God than anything else. Verse 16, this overseer, this guard, allowed them to continue their special diet. Look at verses 17 through 21, and there we see the recognized difference. God gave these 4 men knowledge and understanding in every kind of literature and wisdom. Daniel also understood visions and dreams of every kind. At the end of the time that the king had said to present them, the chief eunuch presented them to King Nebuchadnezzar. The king interviewed them, and among all of them no one was found equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they began to attend to the king. In every matter of wisdom and understanding that the king consulted with them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians, mediums in his entire kingdom. Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. So here we see in verse 17 that the Lord rewarded Daniel and his friends for their integrity and their faithfulness. He gave them knowledge, that book learning. In other words, they became smart folks. They were the smartest ones in the bunch. It says that they had understanding, and that is the ability to apply the knowledge that they had and skills in leadership, skills in application. And so they were smart. They had book smarts, but they also had good practical skills. God gave Daniel the ability to understand visions and dreams. Now, Babylonians highly prized this ability because they believed that the gods spoke through dreams. So this ability to understand dreams was highly valued. In verse 18 through 19, they probably had about a 3-year training period. And so after those 3 years, King Nebuchadnezzar personally interviewed all of these young men, the best of the best, that had been brought there from the various areas that they had captured. The 4 of them were far and above everybody else. And so Nebuchadnezzar assigned them responsibilities, positions in his government. And then in verse 20, every time the king needed to make a decision, he went to those 4. And it says that they were 10 times better. Now, there was not a scoreboard in the king's court that had Daniel and his 3 friends versus all the other pagans, and Daniel 10 and pagans 0. There wasn't a scoreboard. Basically, what he's saying here is that they demonstrated superior wisdom to all others. They were unmatched. Again, magicians and mediums, he's talking about those who were astrologers, those who were enchanters. These people said that they had the ability to communicate with spirits. And so they didn't come close to the abilities of Daniel and his friends. In verse 21, we see that Daniel, when we see this date here, that means that he lived around 85 or 90 years. The King Cyrus, the Persian king that is mentioned here, was the one who released the Jews from captivity. And also it should be noted that no other Old Testament personality, with the exception of Joseph, influenced a pagan nation's affairs to the extent that Daniel did. So I've got you some conclusions here when we think about this lesson. Believers should explain their reasons for holy living when asked to compromise. When you're asked to compromise, you just say, here's why I'm not going to do that. And do it with kindness. Number 2, believers who refuse to compromise God's standards will be vindicated. one day that's going to happen, whether it's in this life or the life to come. We can trust God to show the truth. Number 3, believers find knowledge and understanding when they trust God. And so those are the main points that we're looking at. Again, the title of the lesson is Integrity Established. Now think about what can we do to teach this. Again, you've got 2 bookends. The create interest and the concluding challenge or application. When we think about the bookend of creating interest, when they come into the room, ask them to discuss whether the word compromise has a positive or a negative connotation in our culture and why. And so, again, you spend the vast majority of your time looking at these scriptures, teaching them, going through this familiar story, but then you also have got to make sure that you spend time at the end with the application and closing. And so the closing that I've got for you, the closing challenge, is this. What temptation do you face to compromise? What is it that you are tempted to compromise on? And at the end of your lesson, pray for wisdom and strength to overcome that temptation to compromise. Again, the title of the lesson is Integrity Established. Daniel being an example, Daniel and his friends to be an example for us to follow. What's the point of the lesson? Believers can live with integrity when tempted to compromise. Well, I'll be praying for you as you teach this coming Sunday. And don't forget, I want to hear from you. What's happening in your life? How is this helping you? And help us spread the word about Sunday School University. God bless you.